This is a continuation of respiratory where we left off. So at the end of each bronchiole, of each of the tiny branchings of the airway, are these clusters of air sacs. These are like clusters of little balloons. They're called alveoli. And they literally can inflate like balloons, and they're the place where the gas exchange from oxygen to CO2 occur. Each one of these individually is covered with a network of blood vessels. Remember, the tiniest blood vessels are called capillaries. It's covered with the tiniest blood vessels, this whole network of them. What's happening is the alveoli are so tiny and small, and the blood vessels are so tiny and small that the walls of each are very, very narrow, are very thin, and so the oxygen is able to diffuse, and the CO2 are able to diffuse, and the exchange occurs between the air of the alveoli and the blood of the capillary. So let's close in on that, get a close-up on it. So here's the alveoli, these cluster of grapes. We take just one of these and one blood vessel and cut across it to get a cross-section view. And this is where air is entering and leaving, right? This is the little balloon air sac. And instead, this is where blood is flowing across this capillary here. And as the blood flows, this shows individual red blood cells. The blood gets rid of its CO2, right? We exhale CO2. It's a waste product of cellular respiration. And instead, the blood gains oxygen, right? Oxygen enters each red blood cell, and that's why the blood becomes a brighter red. It's oxygenated. And this happens in each alveoli because it's such a tiny, 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 tiny air sac and such a tiny blood vessel, right? This is microscopic, what's going on here, that there's a very, very, very thin layer of cells to just to diffuse across. And so the exchange is happening there. Remember that the reason this happens is because when we breathe in oxygen, that's just the beginning. Oxygen is needed by every cell in the body. And so getting oxygen to your lungs is just the first part. Then the blood has to take that oxygen and carry it to every cell in your whole body. Okay, these are more pictures. Oh, sorry, I called it surface area because that's what alveoli do, is by being so tiny, the lung tissue is really like the tissue of a sponge. It's full of many tiny holes. And so that provides a great surface area, a large surface area for this gas exchange. Okay, these are more pictures of the same old thing. Notice the blood goes from blue to red because oxygenated blood is a brighter red color. So this is the symbol. Blue is the symbol of deoxygenated blood. This is just the same thing in other images. Actually, I was indecisive about which picture to use, so here's another one yet again. Okay. Oh, one more thing. Notice that on the lungs, the right side, remember that the picture always have to reverse right and left because you have to assume that the person whose body this is, they are looking out of the page or out of the screen at you. So this is the right side. Over here is the right side. On the right, there's 3 lobes, and on the left, there's 2 lobes. And I'm asking you why that might be the case. Why can you imagine? And perhaps you recall that the heart is central, but a little bit leaning towards the left. And so there's room for the heart on the left side. The reason I wanted to show that to you is because I wanted you to look now at this video. It's super cool. You only need to look at about 15 or 20 seconds of it, starting at 45 seconds, because it's a picture of real human lungs being inflated. It's really cool. And you can also watch this lower video here, which shows the mechanism of swallowing. It shows how the epiglottis covers up the trachea during a swallow, during the action of swallowing. Okay, let's skip this. This is only important later on when we study asthma. All right, this is about external membranes. So the external membranes of the lungs are called the pleura, or the pleural membranes. Pleural membranes are made of serous tissue. Serous tissue is tissue that creates and secretes a serous fluid for lubrication. It's lubricating external movement because if you think of your lungs continuously moving as you breathe, your heart continuously moving as it beats, there's friction. They're rubbing up against, the walls of the rib cage, rubbing up against each other. There could be friction. And so instead, there's these linings which kind of protect the outside and lubricate their movements by secreting this kind of slippery serous fluid. So in general, if you recall, the innermost lining, I keep losing my mouse, sorry about that. The innermost lining is called the mucosa, or the mucous membranes, which secrete mucus. That's for any body cavity. The outermost lining are called the serosa, or serous membranes, which secrete serous fluids for external lubrication. This just shows that serous fluids, if you were to imagine a balloon and someone were able to kind of punch their fist inside of a balloon and there would be a double lining. All the serous membranes are like that. It's a double lining of tissues. So you can see the heart has a double lining, the lungs have this double lining in the same way as a fist would be inside a balloon. So don't worry about all this terminology. What you need to know is for the lungs, it's called pleural. The serous membranes are called the pleural membranes. For the heart, they're called pericardial. For the abdomen, peritoneal. Okay. This was something that we had fun with in class, was just looking at what can you name, what can you identify. Notice the vertebrae, the spinal cord inside the vertebrae. Hopefully you can recognize this ridged character. This is the end of the trachea and the two bronchi separated. This is the esophagus. You can see the pleural membranes. The two colors represent the inner blue membrane and the outer green membrane. This is the heart and different blood vessels and valves coming out of it, and so on. Same thing, just a little bit deeper. Notice also what you see here is all the yellow is fat, how it's around the heart and the different blood vessels and esophagus, and also on the outermost, right under the skin, basically. It's called subcutaneous fat. Fat is like a padding and a protection. It holds everything firmly in place and protects things. You can also see all the muscle on the outside here, the back muscles and the intercostal muscles between the ribs. Okay, and this is the one lowest down. Liver, the stomach, and these, if you can guess low down what they are, the two kidneys. Okay, back to the topic. This is a muscle, which is literally the shape of a dome. It's an extremely unusual, strange shape. This is the diaphragm. And we're not really able to see it because it's hidden under the rib cage. This shows other muscles, the muscles that exist between the ribs. There's a close-up of them. There's all these thin layers of muscles between the ribs. We're only going to really study one, the external one. So here's the diaphragm again. You see that dome? This hole here is to make room for the esophagus as well as the major blood vessels. And this dome, we can't feel it because it's all together inside of our rib cage. It's really kind of odd, right? It's a really unusual muscle. So what is the purpose of these intercostal muscles between the ribs and this diaphragm? They're the muscles that aid the movement of breathing. And so, all right, so here the blue stripe is meant to represent the diaphragm. When the diaphragm is relaxed, this picture is not the greatest, really. Let's use this one. When the diaphragm is relaxed, it buckles up, like on the right. That is a relaxed diaphragm. The diaphragm, when it contracts, it presses down and widens. And as it does so, look what it does. It widens the rib cage. It pushes the ribs apart and widens the rib cage. You can see that right here. This is the contracted diaphragm that's pressed down and widens the whole chest wall, and this instead is the relaxed diaphragm, which has buckled up and made that chest cavity smaller. At the same time as that's happening, the intercostal muscles, so each muscle between each set of ribs, which they're not showing the muscle, but they're showing the motion, they contract to make the distance between each rib smaller, and the effect is an overall lift. So the intercostal muscles are lifting your ribs at the moment that your diaphragm is pressing down and widening your rib cage. And so the overall effect is, over here on the left, is a bigger rib cage. And on the right, it's the reverse. These muscles relax, which lets the ribs fall back down. This diaphragm relaxes, which lets it buckle up. And the overall effect is a smaller rib cage. So bigger rib cage, smaller rib cage, contraction of intercostals and of diaphragm. and therefore larger space. There's more room above and out, and this gets pressed down, so there's more room below. So larger rib cage, smaller rib cage. So all those things are happening during inhalation, right? Contraction of both set of muscles and expansion of the rib cage. And here the relaxation of both sets of muscles, diaphragm and intercostals, and a lessening of the rib cage for exhalation. So I hope that, look at this picture again to get the same idea, right? This is breathing in, inhalation. So these muscles are moving up, are moving upward. They're contracting to make the distance between each set of ribs smaller. And this is pressing down, pushing out on the rib cage to make it wider and larger. And this is the opposite. Here, these muscles are relaxing and the ribs fall down, and the diaphragm relaxes and it buckles up. So it's a little bit odd because a relaxed diaphragm is, you would think of it as falling down. You think of things falling with gravity when they're relaxed, but instead a relaxed diaphragm buckles upward, and it makes the volume of the chest decrease. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. And the bottom line, this is a close-up of the intercostal muscles. We're actually really looking only at the external intercostals when we talk about it. There's other aspects to breathing, or to anyway, other things we won't talk about. So these are good videos for you to watch. This is a really cool one to see the diaphragm breathing. And one last comment. We think of ourselves as pushing air in and out. We don't. The movement of your breathing muscles does not carry air in nor push air out. It's pressure, air pressure, which moves air in. Your breathing muscles change the volume of the rib cage, therefore the volume of the lungs, and that in turn changes the pressure. And so when you expand your lungs, the external pressure of the air is greater and pushes air in, and vice versa. That's just a little detail, but it's kind of cool. Okay, that's it for the basics of respiratory.